and welcome to today's MarkMonitor webinar, where we'll be covering our top 10 list of proven brand protection strategies, some key insights into the 10 most effective ways to safeguard your brand online. And I'm Moo of MarkMonitor, and I'll be doing the opening remarks for today's session. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to run through just a few housekeeping items. During the presentation, all participant lines will be muted, and to ensure that there isn't any background noise or interference. If you have any problems joining the session, please text technical support directly. That is 866-229-3239. Now everyone to ask questions at any time during the event, and questions will be all addressed during the Q&A session following the presentation. To submit a question, just click the Q&A tab located on the floating toolbar, and this will open up the Q&A box or type in your question in the space and send. Please send all questions through the Q&A tab only, as this will help with streamlining all questions. Now, questions that our speakers don't have time to get to, we'll be sure to follow up with you offline after today's event. We are recording today's webinar, and on Friday, we plan to send out a follow-up email to all participants with a link to the recording and presentation slides. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today's presentation. Today, joined by brand protection experts Elisa Cooper and Andrew Horton of MarkMonitor. Elisa Cooper is the Senior Director of Product Marketing of Domain Management for MarkMonitor. 2 years of direct experience, she's an expert in the field of online brand protection and domain management. She has worked closely with many Fortune 1000 companies, assisting with domain and brand protection policy development. She has spoken and written extensively on these topics and is an active member of ICANN's business constituency, the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition, and Online Trust Alliance. We are joined today by Andrew Horton, Director of Product Management at MarkMonitor. He's responsible for the product vision and strategy of the brand protection solution. He has 15 years experience in software product management, and the last 8 years focused entirely on the growing problem of corporate brand abuse on the internet. Andrew's research led to the creation of a system that collects and analyzes data from around the world, providing relevant and actionable data to brand owners. So I will go ahead and turn things over to Elisa now to get us started. Lisa?
And again, thank you to everyone for joining our webinar today, where we're going to be covering the top 10 online brand protection strategies. And starting off with our number 1 strategy. I want to talk about something that we've all been sort of dreading and watching and are now really experiencing, and that is the launch of new GTLDs. They really are a reality and are here. If you look back at the timelines and when this all started, back in 2008, I think many brand owners felt that this whole new GTLD landscape could never come into being and that this never really come to fruition. But lo and behold, here we are almost 6 years later, after many drafts of the GTLD program and lots of policy development and refinement. We are now finally at the stage where these new GTLD registries are actually launching, and they're really coming at us pretty fast and furious. What are we seeing, and how is the internet landscape going to really change? Well, there are a whole slew of new kinds of registries which are in the process of launching. There will be what we refer to as .brand registries. There were many companies who applied for registries in the names of their trademarks, and they operate those and not allow others to have registrations. But certainly, .brand registries will likely play prominently in this new landscape. There are also a number of what we call community-based registries, where there are registries that are being sponsored by particular communities, and they're designed to really meet the needs of each of those communities. Then are sort of these geographical kinds of TLDs. There are a number of city names and region names. We have a sort of open generics, and those are really where companies are going to need to focus. Now, there were these sort of applied for closed generics. I don't think that those are going to be allowed to proceed. I believe that, generally speaking, generic TLDs will be required to be launched and to operate in an open manner. What do the numbers of registries look like? What do you have to be on the lookout for? Now, there were approximately 2,000 applications submitted for new gTLD registries when the launch period initially began. Of those 2,000 or so, there were really only 1,400 unique strings applied for. Those 1,400 or so unique strings, a number of them have actually been withdrawn. As I just mentioned, well over half of the strings applied for are brand type. So those are the single registrant TLDs where others will not be able to actually have a registration. So there are really about 620 or so registries where brand owners will have to pay attention, where they will likely meet the eligibility requirements, or there may be some restrictions, but generally speaking, to be able to have registrations. And that's really the number to focus on, 620 or so registries launching over the next 2 years. Now, that's still a really big number and will still be a very difficult landscape for companies to navigate, as these registries are going to be launching on a weekly basis. Some weeks we're seeing 5, 10, even close to a dozen registries launching in a week. And with that much activity going on, companies are going to have to make some difficult decisions about where they register, where they monitor for abuse, and then they are simply going to look at other options such as blocking. What kinds of registries are coming online over the next 2 years? Well, we've really kind of categorized them into 6 different groupings, a way for businesses to think about new gTLDs. There are some registries which are just so generic that we think that all brands should be looking at those very carefully. And you can see that under the box entitled generic. Now, you'll notice that both under the generic box and the corporate identifiers box, .home and .corp are italics. And the reason that is because those are likely to never actually be delegated, because they present some security risk due to the fact that companies for many years have been naming internal resources like intranets or printers or other kinds of network resources, things that are ending with .home and .corp. Those are likely to never be delegated. In fact, I don't think they will. But if they do, certainly these are ones to look at. There are certainly other groups of TLDs that I think all brands should be very aware of, such as the gripe sites. And this is not a complete list. This is a partial list, but some that we think are very representative of what is going to be coming out over the next 2 years. And these are the ones that we think, based on our experience with main names over the last decade, that we think are likely to gain a lot of traction. There are the vice sites, and for some companies, those are very problematic because they never want to see their brands appearing alongside words like .casino or .adult or poker. There are the corporate identifiers. Again, these are concerning because they give a real air of legitimacy, and the potential for brand abuse and fraud is great with these corporate identifiers. Now, it turns out that in order to have, for instance, a .inc, you need to show a certificate of incorporation. Well, it may not be such a great concern, but if the eligibility requirements for these are very loose, then these become, again, a point of concern for large brand owners. Then there are the charitable TLDs. Again, there is a potential for fraud and other kinds of nefarious activities with these if brands are registered and used by fraudsters. And finally, there are also a whole other category of sort of geographic kind of TLDs, and there are a number of city names and some regions names as well. New gTLDs are coming fast and fierce. Really need to take note of exactly their approach is, what their strategy is going to be, whether or not they're going to be, again, registering or taking advantage of something like blocking, or whether they may be doing things like defensive registrations or simply monitoring and police and then taking action where it's necessary. So the fact that this whole landscape is really changing, now's the time to really rethink your defenses. And this brings us to our number 2 strategy. And if you're thinking that you're just, to deal with new GTLDs, you're just going to register defensively across 620 registries, we are really encouraging that companies again, because trying to do that broadly is not only cost prohibitive, it's really impractical, especially given the fact that most corporate domain name portfolios are already very bloated. As sort of alluded to, one option may be to block names in registries that are offering a blocking option. It's a less expensive way to essentially keep squatters from making registrations that are exact matches to trademarks that have been submitted to the Trademark Clearinghouse. There are 2 groups out there that are going to be offering blocking. One is a group by the name of Donuts. They applied for over 300 TLDs, and the other group is Right Registry, and they applied for several dozen TLDs. It's unclear how many registries those 2 groups will end up operating, but they do have an option where you can essentially protect your trademark from cyber squatters. It doesn't protect the trademark from other trademark owners coming in and having a registration even for something that you blocked, but it does protect you against the cyber squatters. We're encouraging that as opposed to trying to go out there and register broadly and defensively, that companies really focus on where there is a close nexus between what brands are all about and what the TLD is marketing. So for instance, if in financial industries, you'd be looking closely at things like a .bank and .insurance. .horse? Probably not. And really making some strategic decisions about where it makes the most sense, and it does take time to do that work. Clearly, given that you're not going to be able to register broadly, policing and investigating where there is domain name abuse is going to be critical. And we're already seeing examples of abuse occurring. The big question becomes, well, do you take a approach where you're going to go after everything, or are you going to monitor and see what is actually happening on that particular website? Is there some actual activity, or do you have a bona fide concern about that registrant having that domain? Because as we're seeing more abuse, I think companies are going to even have to be selective in terms of what they decide to pursue. Now, you should definitely take note that with the new GTLD program in particular, you've got some new options for addressing clearly infringing and abusive domains. And one of those options is a new process called the Uniform Rapid Suspension. And in essence, this is a less expensive sector UDRP. And a complainant can submit a complaint that's no more than 500 words in cases where a new GTLD is being used in a clear-cut case of infringement, and it can take as little as a week to get a finding. The only downside of the URS is that there is no transfer mechanism, meaning if you file a complaint through the URS and you are found to be legitimate owner and this other registrant has legitimate rights, that name will be suspended. It will be transferred back to you, but it will be suspended, and on the page that the domain is pointing to will be language that says this name has been suspended, and the suspension will last for the remainder of the term on the domain. So if the domain had been registered for a year, the suspension will remain in place until that domain expires. When the domain expires, it becomes available again for registration. But the upside is that it is relatively low cost in comparison to the UDRP, which is still available to you, but quite a bit of work, much more time-consuming, can be significantly more expensive because those are often farmed out to law firms. But in addition to the URS and the UDRP, you also have a couple of new policies in place, which are policies which are geared directly at the registry. So if the registry is engaging in behavior that is encouraging infringement, or they are taking advantage of their TLD to infringe somebody's mark, or they're not following the contractual agreement that they have with ICANN or that they've made with their communities, there are some policies in place to go directly at the registry itself. And of course, you still have an administrative, legal, or technical means for shutting down websites as well. Next is to our number 3 strategy, and that is really making sure domain security is a priority. And many of you may know that last year there have been a number of security events that have occurred. Some of the security events have been occurring at the registries. And just to give you a base of comparison, a registry is basically the wholesaler of a top-level domain. So in the case of .com, there is the registry for .com. And by comparison, MarkMonitor is registrar. But we've been seeing these breaches at the registry level. And when it comes to registry security, as a registrant, there's not much that you can do, except that you can be monitoring for when breaches occur and then reacting very quickly. And that's what MarkMonitor does for our clients. We're constantly monitoring registries to ensure that settings that are occurring at the registry match what we have and what we know to be what the client is expecting. When we identify that there is a mismatch, we work immediately to work with that registry to address whatever breach has occurred. Again, the best that you can do when it comes to a registry breach is to react quickly, get things switched back, name server settings switched back to what they were previously, because there's only one registry for each TLD. If you want to have, for instance, a CN name, it must be acquired so CNNIC, which is the registry.cn. Same thing for Belgium or Malaysia. If you want to have a Belgian a .be name, there's only one registry. So the best that you can do is really to find a breach quickly and then react to it. We found that most of these breaches are really just resulting in names being directed to politically motivated sites. We've also seen a number of outages and hacks occurring at the registrar level. And so, again, these are primarily focused on reading content to politically motivated sites. We have not really seen any breaches where content had been redirected and then used in cases of fraud or where credential information was in recent past. We haven't seen where credential information has been stolen. There was a scenario like that happened many, many years ago. But as of late, we're really just seeing these, registrar has been breached, that domain names are being redirected to politically motivated content. Now, I guess you can ask yourself, what can you do to protect yourselves when it comes to domain name security? Well, there's one thing that I recommend that all companies do for their core sites and core domains, and that is log those names at the registry level. What that does is it ensures that even if the registry or the registrar is breached, that automated updates to name servers or settings cannot be updated in an automated format. And so for every company with your core domains, if registry locking is available, I encourage you to do that. The other major thing that can help is ensuring that you've got two-factor authentication on both your domain management and any DNS portals that you have, because if your credentials are lost or stolen, having an additional one-time password will ensure that only you can get into the account. There are a number of other things that we recommend as well, such as, obviously don't share your credentials, require mandatory password updates. If you can implement IP access restrictions through your registrar, make sure that you're receiving notifications of every domain name update. So as domains are being updated, you're aware of everything that's going on. Of course, we encourage brand owners to make sure that the registrar that you're working with is one that is really fully hardened against these kinds of breaches and is prepared to take action quickly if something does arise. So with that, I'm actually going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague Andrew Horton now to take us through some more brand-focused strategies. Andrew?
Thank you, Elisa. Appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and start here and talk a little bit about enforcements and some aspects of brand protection. And I often get asked the question, how do you really get the most from a brand protection investment? And for us, a combination of focusing on technology, because we're talking about analyzing massive amounts of data, and coupling that with experience and really understanding the landscape for brand infringements. First, we expect people to really align their enforcement strategy with the business problems. There's a lot of different ways to enforce, and it really depends on what's going on. You're going to treat your affiliates and issues with affiliates very differently than you would treat problems with counterfeiting. Next, you want to leverage the business intelligence to focus on the biggest offenders, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in the upcoming slides. But as you can see, kind of from my graphic here, there are ways to link actors on the internet together. A lot of cases we're looking at websites. We can actually analyze the makeup of these sites, not simply domain registration data, but other aspects of websites to link these things together. And really tie those so that you don't have to waste a lot of time on these sites that aren't really making as big of an impact on your business. In addition to the technology, it's really important to establish relationships with these online service providers for more efficient enforcement processing, and working with them to understand their policies. They are interested in seeing this data, and really working with them as partners to achieve the best success. So just an example of this. This is a case study of a luxury brand, and this is just the first 6 months, and using technology to cluster websites together where prior to using this kind of technology, they were going after websites, submitting lawsuits to get those websites taken down and assets frozen and the like, and having some good success with that. But by coupling that with the technology, they were able to add on another 800 websites in a very short time period by linking these sites together, standing up in court and showing that these sites are truly linked together, and we're able to put an 83% reduction in the rogue websites that were selling counterfeits against their brand. So very effective coupling technology with their brand strategy. Number 5 strategy here, it's really focusing on Asian markets, and there are 2 main reasons for doing this. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody, but an awful lot of the manufacturing around the world happens in Asia, and due to that fact alone, you get manufacturing on for products that are not good for your brand. Counterfeits and the like also occur in those regions. So that's a big reason for focus there, but also it is a huge strategic market for most brand owners. And you can see that from looking at the statistics here, and particularly in the internet space. There's over 1.1 billion internet users now, and 44% of all of the internet users worldwide are in Asia. So 1.1 billion users there in Asia. And then we look at the commerce that's actually happening in Asia, and since 2003, the growth rates are a compounded rate of 120% every year. That's basically doubling every year. And then when we look at the Chinese online shoppers in China alone here over the last 3 years, it's doubled, surging to 250 million. Very key strategic market. The next question is, how do you go about enforcing your rights in Asia? And before you actually go about doing this, you really need to establish a strong intellectual property portfolio. International trademarks don't always work in China. There are exceptions to this where these marketplaces are actually selling worldwide, but when it comes to those that are targeting local consumers, you really need a local Chinese trademark in order to do enforcements on those. Some will only accept trademarks in color and with an official stamp, so there's a lot of strict rules about how you can submit and file these. And if there are times when brand owners don't actually hold the required class of the trademark, this can also hinder their enforcement. So a lot of tedious work in terms of getting these things set up. It's really important to maintain, if you're getting copyrights here, reference libraries of your copyrighted materials, and if you're going to go the patent route, in some cases that may make sense to make sure that your portfolios are up to date and that everything is really buttoned up before you go about enforcing. So the next step, once you've got all that set up, is really understanding the scope and prioritizing your enforcements. And that starts by really understanding the scope of the problem and focusing, as I mentioned, on the various types of business problems. And so what I recommend people do if the problem is counterfeits is really disrupting the counterfeits and becoming a hard target. And this involves scouring these sites, regularly removing listings, focusing in on the high-volume infringers first, so you can make the biggest impact with the least amount of effort. Then everything else you want to sort of categorize, looking at, are these counterfeits, is it a market, is it legitimate, do I potentially have an issue or problem with my distribution partners, which would cause me to take a completely different tact than something that's counterfeit. So once you've sort of done that and made it kind of hard, then you want to sort of escalate your enforcement processes. So looking at persistent sellers, are they post things over and over again, and is the online marketplace not taking any action against that seller? It may require leveraging your brand name and going out and having meetings with those marketplaces and sharing the information and data with them to get changes in how they're treating these sellers. This goes back to my point about establishing those relationships and having the experience to go out there and work with these online service providers. It's all about developing a regional strategy. So we're talking about Asia, so focusing on how you attack this problem in here, and it's about setting realistic goals. So some of the reasons I mentioned, going in and having a assumption that you're going to get 100% compliance on everything you send in terms of enforcement in this region is probably not realistic. But as long as you are through your strategy and looking so the things that you see here on the slide, you certainly can make a significant impact. You want to definitely prepare and evolve your strategy. So as the environment changes or you're making progress through the strategy, you may need to actually adapt and change the process. Again, you want to look at the distribution partners and affiliates that you have in your region and understand how they're working and it may be impacting the types of things that you're seeing on the internet. We stress enough how important it is to have local native speakers who are partners, and this could be a law firm, it could be your brand protection provider, it could be your own staff in the region. But what we found is that by having people in the same time zone who can communicate back and forth on various issues, it just makes a huge difference in the success that you can see. It's also important to the types and natures of problems that exist and what the expected outcome of this is. We have an example of a client that has a problem with what we call look-alike brands. So it's a completely different brand name, different trademark, but the product itself is essentially the same. When we are really sending in claims on these marketplaces sending information back to us saying, we don't see your trademark on the product, and so that requires, again, this relationship building the back and forth work with these folks to eventually get them to consider those as being infringements against your brand. So here to our strategy number 6. This is keeping up with the fast movers and emerging trends in online infringements, and specifically looking at both social media and so starting with social media, these are some best practices. One of the things that we encourage people to do is proactively register your brands across social media sites. So what does this mean? It means that social media sites, you can often register what's sometimes known as a vanity URL or a username that becomes part of a URL on that social networking site. Give you one example. Everybody's familiar with Twitter. Twitter has what are called handles, which are names. There's a lot of cases of this, but instances where companies go out, they're planning on launching an entire product line. They do all their work. They go through the naming exercise. They build their marketing collateral and product strategy around this, and then they find out that the Twitter handle is already taken by somebody else. And in today's world, that is pretty much a showstopper, and they have to go back to the drawing board to come up with a more appropriate name. So go out there and register ahead of time where you can, and then to basically search social media for unauthorized use. So looking at the names, the pages that are out there, fan pages. Are these fan pages, or are they being used for something else? While people search globally, I would also recommend that people start and focus on the social networking sites that are the largest and have essentially the most eyeballs. Might seem like common sense, but sometimes we can get distracted with other types of infringements. So be aware of the emerging sites and stay ahead of the curve, and then take action, but also do it very cautiously. You want to catalog these brand infringements and then do enforcements based on the terms of service of the site and how damaging it may be to your brand. It's really important to make sure that these enforcement efforts are coordinated with the other folks within your company who rely on social media as a mechanism for marketing to and building customer loyalty, and you want to make sure that you don't do anything that might damage that. And as with anything else, maintaining a constant vigilance and continually monitoring these sites for potential problems. Internal applications, this is obviously just an explosion in terms of growth and a different way that people are essentially interacting with things that are found on the internet. The statistics are just incredible, and the point I'm trying to make here is that there are a couple of mobile app marketplaces that make up a lion's share of the downloads that are happening. So if you need to focus and prioritize, apps certainly can be damaging. In terms of their reach, it could potentially be a lot less than some of these other ones. So my advice would be to focus on the largest marketplaces first. Some of the problems that we see in mobile apps and some of the ones that are key to focus on, certainly impersonation. So if somebody has created a app that looks exactly like yours and are doing things that obviously they shouldn't, that's something that I would be on the guard for. False association as well. You spend money building your brand and having somebody else then leverage that that might do something in a way that isn't very favorable to your brand is something to consider. So this can be a little bit more challenging in terms of monitoring because a lot of times they're not actually using trademarks in terms of advertising, but things that are more aligned with piracy. So you want to make sure that if this is a particular problem that you're monitoring for things other than just movie titles and music titles, but actually the actions that people will take to engage in piracy. Copyright infringement and trademark or logo abuse, pretty common. Distribution of viruses and malware can also be a tricky one, as the brand may not necessarily be easily recognizable. So again, trying to find the apps that might actually have this could require searching on things that are more the industry, not necessarily your brand. So it could be in the banking, you might want to look at everything that is a ATM locator or a account or bank account aggregator. Those types of things would be of concern in terms of searching. Enforcement best practices can be tricky. A lot of these apps prefer that you go to the developer first, and if it's fairly harmless, that might be a need to get a change made. If somebody's using a logo and didn't necessarily think it was a bad thing, that's probably an easy, quick way to get that fixed. If it happens to be a mobile app that is submitting somebody's credentials somewhere or accessing their contact list and it shouldn't be, those would be things, obviously, to go direct to the App Store with first and try to get those removed as quickly as possible. Here too, number 7, cutting off the pirates' revenue stream. So this one is specific to those brand owners with digital content. And I have a fairly complex diagram here because it is a complex process and relationship of how pirates and those that are in the piracy chain, if you will, are making money. So left-hand corner, we have our commercial and consumer pirates who are posting content on hosting services. So typically on the web, these are things known as cyber lockers or file shares. Consumers then are licensing, creating a subscription license to those so they can actually download content from those providers. Those providers, however, do not provide search interfaces, but rather when somebody posts something up there, they get a URL back, and then those URLs are found posted on what we call linking sites. Those are the ones that are part of the ad networks. They're serving ads. That's how they make their money. So they're involved in these ad networks. And, of course, and the media buyers for the brands are purchasing ad placement through the ad networks, and in some cases may or may not know that their ads are actually showing up on these linking sites, which are promoting pirated content. And they all happen to be getting a lot of traffic, so in some cases the ads are showing up on there. And mostly most legitimate brands who's showing up there would have no idea that that's happening. And then, of course, we have the search engines as well, where the linking sites are being indexed in those and potentially driving traffic to the linking sites as well. The question then is, how do we handle this and what can we do about this? And the key here, of course, is following the money. So looking at who's paying for what and how we address these issues. So we can detect and remove pirate content from hosting services. So by doing so, the consumers, are probably less likely, if they're not getting pirated content, less likely to subscribe to those services, except for legitimate reasons. And then we're also looking at the linking sites, and as long as we can detect those brand ads that are showing up on there, we can then work with the ad networks and the brands to make sure that their ads are not showing up on the linking sites. And then, of course, anything that a search engine has indexed that is contributing to piracy can be removed from the search engine indexes as well, which basically cuts off the traffic to the linking sites. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach for dealing with the linking sites, which are really the ones that are making the money on the piracy. So tackling this, is a group, the IAB, which is the Trade Association for Internet Advertising. They're highly focused on this. The members have a vested interest to make sure that certain things are in line, from privacy to copyright infringement, fraud, and transparency. And so there's a lot of participation and involvement in this process to make sure that the advertisements that there's no legitimate advertising going on sites that are promoting piracy. So I'm going to wrap up here before handing back to Elisa on number 8, which is all about brand trust and the omni-channel world that we're now operating in, which is made up of the online and the offline, and how the online really influences the offline world. And when we look at this, we're really focused here on consumer trust, and consumer trust can be threatened or impacted by the nefarious online activity. And just have a few statistics here, some real eye-opening things. We did a study looking at people were searching on search engines and how that behavior to various sites, either legitimate or illegitimate. We found is that 1 in 5 people searching for bargains, so these people weren't searching for fakes or counterfeits or replicas, but were actually searching for deals, were actually duped into making purchases on counterfeit sites. So 20% serious impact on consumer trust in your brand. Also, a study here done by Accenture, which shows that 65% of online shoppers plan to browse online and then head to stores to make their purchases. So, again, the experience that they have online is impacting what they do offline. Last one was really eye-opening. A survey done by of thousands of IT professionals, very senior IT professionals who not only had insights into the IT side of things, but also into the business. Ranked cyber threats is the second biggest danger to business, second only to economic uncertainty. So obviously, what's happening online is a major concern. And keys to mitigating that risk then are cleaning up the online channel, making it harder or easier, I should say, for your consumers to find legitimate information and legitimate products in a very safe way. Also urging the online intelligence to guide offline actions, so also very important. Ultimately making your brand a hard target and hopefully one that these online criminals just don't bother with anymore. So with that, back over to Elisa to wrap up for us.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to cover number 9 and number 10 before we open it up for Q&A. 9 is really all around protecting your digital content. And as Andrew had just reviewed with you, there are many different places where this digital content can be found. It's not just on websites. You're going to have to look at what's going on with cyber lockers. You're going to need to look at what's going on with peer-to-peer sites. You're going to need to look at what's coming up in search engine rankings. With the growing popularity of streaming content, both live and video, that's another important area for many owners of copyrighted materials. And finally, even looking at that ad monitoring network, as Andrew just mentioned. And of course, along with all of these different vectors, there are a number of different enforcement options as well. So it may mean a delisting of information from search engine results, or it may mean requesting a takedown under the DMCA. You've got many, many different options for remediating this type of abuse. Another, area to take into consideration, and it's my number 10, is as you're going through these massive quantities of data, there is some very valuable information to be gleaned. Clearly, you can understand what it is exactly people are looking for. As you just saw from Andrew's slides, a good percentage of people that are looking to purchase something online are not looking to purchase something that's counterfeit. They're looking for something that they want. So understanding, this data and the market drivers for counterfeit goods can actually lead you to information about what your legitimate consumers are wanting, what to purchase. And so case in point is a a jeans manufacturer was seeing a tremendous amount of counterfeit activity around 26 jeans in a particular region of the world. Lo and behold, that jean manufacturer didn't even make that jean in that particular size. And by being able to uncover that information, understand it, they were really able to identify a true market need, and they were able to meet the needs of their clients. And that's just one example. Are there certain colors or packages or special offers or certain things that are sought after from certain markets? That's all very valuable data that can be gleaned in addition to, addressing the counterfeit issue. There's good data here to be had, which can really help you to increase your legitimate sales while at the same time taking action against the counterfeiters. So covered top 10 brand protection strategies, and hopefully you've been able to glean some nuggets. But what I'm going to do right now is turn it over to Andrew to take us through a Q&A. We've got a good 15 minutes or so. So again, please utilize the Q&A box down at the bottom corner of your screen, and we'll be happy to take questions from you. Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. And yes, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box, and we'll respond to those. First question here, Lisa, for you here is about the new GTLD registration rates, and the question is, are people really registering?
Question, I think, for all of us was whether or not we are going to actually see registrations occurring and whether or not we see any abuse. And the answer to both of those is a qualified yes. I think that about 150,000 brand new domain name registrations occurring across the TLDs that have launched so far. Seeing examples of brand abuse, we've already seen a few brands utilize the uniform rapid suspension to send clearly infringing names. So the answer is yes. I'll also say that many brands are taking advantage of this blog offering that is offered by Donuts, which I mentioned in the presentation, as a way to keep cyber squatters out. So there's definitely a lot of activity, both on the legitimate registration side as well as on the sort of cyber squatting side.
Okay, thank you. Question here, that's the Asian language marketplaces, which I can take. How successful are brand owners at removing listings on Asian language marketplaces? And go back to setting the right expectations, but we actually see brand owners, as long as they are following the policies and ensuring that they have the right trademarks and patents filed, that the amount of complaints that we're getting is actually quite high. But it's all about having the right setup and the right expectations, and once those things place. There are some marketplaces where it is a bit of a challenge to do things at a tremendous amount of scale, which kind of slows the process down a little bit. But assuming those things are set up fine, and then we're doing pretty good. Here's a Lisa, that's related to the new GLDs, and wondering if they're in any language other than English. Do we see translations, and not necessarily internationalized domain names, but just things other than English? I know, Uno was out there, but I'm wondering if there are other ones.
There are definitely IDN, so to the right of the dot in non-Latin character sets. In fact, the first to officially launch was .shabaka, which was an Arabic translation for something that means online or network. Yeah, there are definitely languages such as Chinese, Japanese, Hindi, a whole slew of them. There are only around just over 100, I think there are about 130 or so of them, so not necessarily a significant percentage overall, but I'm sure there is the possibility of those picking up some steam in some of those local markets.
Another question too that is interesting you might want to take a look at, and this is, are there any repercussions for registrars that sell domains that contained registered marks to individuals who are not the trademark owner?
Exactly. So, there is a new policy in place where you can go after the registry for encouraging the systematic infringement of trademarks. So that is a new policy in place. We haven't seen how that will work in practice, but that new policy does exist. Now, that does have to happen in GTLDs is that somebody attempts a registration of an exact match trademark that exists in the Trademark Clearinghouse. So if a brand owner has submitted their mark to the Trademark Clearinghouse and someone else tries to register an exact match of that trademark in the first 90 days of the general availability period, the registrar must present back to the potential registrant a notice that says to the potential registrant, the domain that it says something along the lines of, the domain you're about to register matches rights that reside within the Trademark Clearinghouse. Do you wish to continue? And all registrars must protocol in terms of providing that information back to the potential registrant if it's within the first 90 days of the general availability period. But the real question that's being asked is, is there any way to go after the registrar per se, and some hold them accountable? Not through CAN. I'm sure litigation is always a possibility. There's no policy in place. That's the difficulty, though, would be for registrars to determine who the rightful owner of a particular trademark is.
Another question here that I can probably help answer, but it would probably require some additional follow-up. It's, do you have suggestions for trying to get material removed from YouTube? They request you complete a copyright form, but that does not really meet my needs. Certainly a lot of online service providers provide forms for copyright, primarily due to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which require these service providers to respond to takedown notices, so they're not, or so they essentially have safe harbor from any kind of prosecution. But when it's related to something other than copyright, it's more challenging. This would be one of those areas where leveraging relationships and experience and being able to navigate these online service providers to really focus in on what the problem is, and is it something that can be acted upon? Is it an issue of free speech, in which case there's probably nothing that can be done, but in cases there can be some discussion around that to get action taken that might be something other than copyright. And then there's another question here about regarding having trademarks in countries in order for me to be more effective in legal actions. So, for example, if we have typo squads that appear to be registered in, say, Indonesia, are you saying that we'd be better with trademarks there? My discussion was mostly around the sale of goods and issues around that having trademarks there, because the laws can be very different. In some countries, they're first to file, which means somebody else has a trademark before you, just simply on file. Not necessarily that they used it before, or that they can just then start producing products with that trademark. Be careful of that. Domain names and issues in the domain names themselves, and correct me if I'm wrong, Elisa, are typically more an extension of copyright, and so the more global response to those types of actions. And certainly if it's a GTLD, UDRP is definitely an avenue, and that I'm not sure that local trademark registration is necessarily required, but if somebody else were to have a trademark in that particular country, that may help them and make it hard for you to actually to take kind of action. One more question here, Elisa, and it's related to security. What is the single most important I should be doing to protect my domain names from a security perspective?
I think I'm going to have to answer that by giving, there are two things in combination. One, as I kind of mentioned during the presentation, log names at the registry level where possible is critical. That will protect the name not only from, a fraudster or a hacker or some, politically motivated person who wants to redirect the site. It's going to actually protect the name from any erroneous mistake or change that the domain administrator might make. It renders that domain unchangeable, uneditable in any automated fashion. There has to be manual protocols that are followed before the domain is put into a state where an update could be made. So one, locking the domain at the registry, and I can tell you, it's available for a number of the GTLDs and for a couple dozen CCTLDs. So it is an option in many of the most common TLDs out there. But the second thing I think is critical and that I would highly recommend companies do is to never share logins and passwords. Do not send that information to one another in email, and implement two-factor authentication, because that is really going to protect and ensure that the person logging into the account is the person that's supposed to be into the account. So it means you have your username, your password, and then a one-time password delivered via a token or a mobile device. So together, those two things, if you have those implemented, I feel pretty confident your domains are going to have the highest levels of security possible.
We have one more minute. I would like to wrap up just with one more thing, Elisa, because there were a couple questions that came on this one, and it is related to the NTA and the recent decision to basically control over to ICANN on some of the internet functions, and whether there's risk then of them turning and handing it over to somebody else, or other types of impact that might have, and just wanted to real quickly to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm headed out of Boise to Singapore to attend the ICANN conference, and this is going to be a very hot topic. I think a couple of things. This is, in my opinion, been a little bit misreported in the press, because I keep seeing things that, U.S. government relinquishes control of ICANN or the internet. Well, first of all, the U.S. never had control over ICANN per se. The U.S. had a sort of what the affirmation of commitments, and it basically ICANN promised the United States that they would do certain things, but they never direct control or direct oversight of the U.S. government over ICANN. What the U.S. government did have a contract for was the technical maintenance and management of the backbones. Basically, had a contract for the servers that are serving up information that really helps the internet backbone to actually work. And that's what the U.S. government said, that they wanted to sort of step back from that contract, that they would turn the contract over when it expires in 2015, and that they wanted ICANN to essentially come up with an approach for how those servers be maintained, and that they wanted it to be a multi-stakeholders approach, which means that it's not just governments, but it's also stakeholders, members of the community, people for business, those with intellectual property concerns, that it would be the entire community coming together to make a decision about what process would be for management of those servers. So that is what has really happened. And I feel very confident that ICANN is going to take this very seriously and will engage the entire community to come up with the process. And there's already several hours devoted at the ICANN meeting to come up with what that new transition will be and how it will be managed, how these servers we managed. And so I feel pretty confident that we're not going to see any changes in the near term. And I think that this appears to be the right thing for the internet, because we still want to continue to have this multi-stakeholder approach to internet. We don't want any one government having control. That multi-stakeholder approach, which is really the foundation and core of ICANN, I think is a good thing for everybody.
Okay, we're past our end time, so again, thanks Elisa, and thanks everyone who attended today's seminar, and we're done for the day, so thanks again.